So sexual identity is something that I guess it's just like getting uncovered more and more these days. So there's sexual orientation, which is like what you are attracted to, what you're drawn to, um, gender identity of the other person, right? Or the body parts of the other person. And then sexual identity is actually like more about how you attach to people. So like examples would be like demisexuality, which is like needing to feel an emotional connection before feeling a sexual connection, or like sapiosexuality. Sapiosexuals need to feel an intellectual connection in order to feel aroused. And then we're getting into a relatively new identity in terms of it actually being named. It's been around, but it's like an actual new category being named, which is called fraysexuality. And this is a sexual identity where uh, someone is more turned on or exclusively turned on by sex with people that they either don't know or are not intimately connected to. And then kind of as soon as like intimacy starts, like once you start to get to know somebody, the arousal can quickly get extinguished, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would sort of say this is kind of sort of the opposite of a demisexual,
Right.
right? Who
Right.
needs the romance and the connection to feel sexually turned on, and this is sort of the opposite of that. You know, just as you're talking though, I feel like all of these are experiences. I mean, to some degree, don't you feel like you have experienced a little bit of everything? I hate kind of putting people in one category, but I guess some people are do feel much more categorized. And so that's what we're going to talk about, the
Mhm.
person who identifies as fraysexual and what that means, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like what you're getting at is this is something that exists on a spectrum, just like everything. And it's not like you need to choose if you're fraysexual or not. Like the whole concept of queerness is that we are internally vast and we have different experiences. At the same time, I have seen in my therapy practice, I've experienced in my life, people who really do firmly identify this way, that they really connect to casual or anonymous sex, and that as soon as there's intimacy involved, the that part the aroused part really gets kind of shut down. And that I think in some cases that's something to really like look at and kind of challenge, like, okay, what are the defenses that arise? And in other cases, it's like more about acceptance, like, oh yeah, this is just what I like and I'm gonna go for it.
Right, right. And I do feel like a key thing here is loving and accepting like every experience that you are having, right? It's an organic experience that's coming up. So if, as opposed to having some sort of shame around it or like from an external person, so somebody might think, oh, you can only have sex with strangers and feel very judgmental about that. It's just an experience. And I would say that that is such a spectrum because it also makes me think about any couple who has been in a relationship for a while, how that sexual desire can really dip, right? And then like how to get it back. But again, going back to fraysexuality, like sort of a general over time, um, enjoying sex with somebody that they don't know as well, right? Or a stranger.
Right, right. So there's a spectrum here. Let's just like explicitly talk about the spectrum. One is like on the end of like sort of more pure fraysexuality, which is you have a very strong, persistent um, preference. I don't even know if I'd call it preference, but this is the anonymous and casual sort of novel seeking sex really works for you. And then as soon as you even like learn anything about somebody, like sometimes even just learning their name or just like basic info makes it so you no longer feel turned on, right? That like there's an element of them being unknown, a stranger, that is the thing that is arousing. And
Yeah.
then, at the other end of the spectrum, I would say that there's the person who likes that type of sex and has a preference for it, but also enjoys connected, intimate sex, might be in a longer term relationship where they're having different types of sex, might be in a polyamorous relationship where they're having all sorts of different kinds of connection and intimacy. But there's still like a preference for like this is what I want amongst these other things that I enjoy, right?
Yeah, right. Chocolate chip is my favorite.
Right.
Um, yeah, I'm sort of I had a question and now I just actually just lost it.
That's okay. I mean, you brought up one thing before, which we could dive into, which is like how do I know if I'm fraysexual? Like there is this concept of that Esther Perel has made very commonplace. Like I think most people have like heard of this, at least that when we're in relationship, especially long-term relationship, there's this, there's our connection, there's our drive for safety, and there's our drive for eroticism. And the drive for eroticism and um, that type of sex is really tied to like risk and danger and like not knowing our partner fully, right? Like there's some part of them we don't know, and it's kind of
Yeah,
scary, but it turns us on, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so when when is it just kind of like a relationship where you've developed enough intimacy to feel like you really know the other person, and then the attraction starts to drop off because you know them so well. And then when is it, on the other hand, like more like a sexual identity in this case, where this is it's not just about me being with somebody for so long that I know them so well that I'm not as turned on. It's actually something that I feel so strongly about in terms of my preferences that like this is an identity that I want to take on.
Exactly. You know, you bring up the word safety. So I want to explore something, and you can absolutely disagree with me. But I think what comes up for me, I do not identify as fraysexual, but I certainly have had, I've had a lot of years of experience over a lifetime of having sex with myself. And I think that this issue of safety, I think in a lot of ways, sex with somebody, sex without having to relate to somebody and care for someone else right there in the room allows one to be just like as if they're by their self, right? But they actually get to be with another body. So I would say that for a lot of people, that might feel safe, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a way in which like sex with strangers makes it so that you can kind of just like project what you want onto the person and they don't disrupt that projection and you get out clean, right? And that can be great. Like that can be thrilling, like to actually have your projection and have it play out. Like that can be really fun and can be really satisfying. And I think we're also like bringing some curiosity to this identity of like, well, okay, so if you're thinking about identifying as fraysexual, like have you pushed beyond that type of sex to experience what it's like to be with somebody who breaks through your projection and is a complicated human being? And what has that been like? Or is it just like, okay, this feels good and that feels kind of messy, and so I'm just gonna go with this thing and identify that way, right?
Yeah, I think because we're therapists, like that like surfing the wave of whatever the feeling is that's coming up, I feel like is such an important space, right? Because some sort of, if we were to take a magnifying glass at that experience, like so a fraysexual is in relationship with someone else and attempting to maybe stay physically connected, to see what arises would be so interesting, right? Because it could be danger sort of things could come up, or it could just be like this bores me, which would be two really different things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think probably the message that we're sending, if you're thinking about this identity, is to make sure that you've explored like different types of sex with varying levels of connection and see what that brings up for you. And don't take discomfort as a sign of like I shouldn't do that again. Like it might actually be an opening towards some other part of yourself that um, will be wonderful for you.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, I know couples, I have seen couples where they both identify as fraysexual, and they have accepted that novel sex is what works for both of them, and it's an open relationship, and they have casual sex outside of the relationship and are still very connected in other ways that aren't sexual. And the relationship has worked quite well. So like there is possibility on both. We're not saying that like the fraysexuality is just like a defensive structure that you need to work through and get to the other side. Like
Yeah.
it is very valid if you land there at the end of the exploration and say, this is what works for me, that's valid. And make sure that you explore. Make sure you go through a period of exploration of different types of sex with varying levels of intimacy to then arrive at that place of how do you want to identify.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think there's probably, I mean, I think it'd be too easy and sort of damning to think of phrase sexuality as being just so outside the norm. I mean, let's bring it into the norm, right? I think there's lots of people who identify as phrase sexual who have intimate connections in other ways, right? Close friendships, even like a close partnership.
Right.
I mean, honestly, I mean, can't you think of a lot of lesbian couples that like they literally have stopped having sex? I want to
And
say,
honestly, gay couples too. I know so many older gay couples that
yeah,
have stopped having sex with each other, and they're having sex outside the relationship that could be like novel, thrilling sex, or it might be connected sex, like depending on the situation. Um, but their connection is really no longer about sex, and that's okay, I guess is what we're getting at.
yeah, exactly. Any last words?
No, I think I've said my piece. This is new and this is a new and emergent identity, even though people have been exploring it and fraysexuals have existed forever, but we're giving language to it. So I think if you are considering it, like, um, give yourself the time and space to like be with the language and explore and like see what fits for you before rushing into anything.
Yeah. And I would only add, just to feel gentle and compassionate for yourself when you're attempting to put yourself in any sort of category, right?
Right. And the last thing I would say is like if you do, really embrace your fraysexual side and you decide that's how you want to identify, it's important to then have a conversation with yourself about the risks involved
Yeah.
in that type of sex and to figure out what are the boundaries I'm going to put it in place for myself, how I'm going to protect myself so that you're coming at it, what are the values I want to adhere to? So you're coming at it from a conscious place instead of what we see often, I think, Megan, in therapy is like people having anonymous or casual sex in a very disembodied way. Like you can actually identify this way and have a really honest conversation with yourself or your therapist about how do I want to engage in this type of sex in a way that still feels okay, that I'm still kind of like in my own body and it's still kind of aligning with my own values, right?
Thanks so much for bringing that piece.
Yeah.